Today, we're going to go through the tactics of projecting boulders. We're going to break it down into 3 stages, go through some goal setting for the process, and also touch on some of the common pitfalls that people have going through projecting. I'm going to try this boulder to show the 3 stages, so let's get into it. So the start of any projecting session is obviously going to be your warm-up. And I think it's important that this is quite dialed in, especially if you're going sort of multiple sessions into a project. I try to break it down into 2 sections. So the first bit is going to be very routine and standardized. So for me, the biggest element is warm my fingers up, and I'm doing this with a pickup edge and a tin deck. And this just means that I can go through a routine of hitting certain numbers, and I know when I hit a given number that my fingers are recruited, and it's giving me an initial data point. If my numbers are high, I sort of have a suggestion that it might be quite a strong session, and that informs then, if a move feels wrong on the project, then it's not because I'm tired that day, it's I'm doing something wrong. On the flip side, if my numbers are low and a move feels hard, maybe I don't read into it too much. Like I know that I'm not feeling super strong that day and I should be focusing on smaller elements. And so go through all that and have that totally standardized, really from every session that you do, not just projecting, and then you're just very in tune with your body and how it feels. You have a solid starting point of where you feel you're at in the session. The second part is then going to be dialing it in more specifically to the climb that you're on. So that might be doing some specific grip types, whether that's a drag or sort of getting really revved up into a high angle crimp, or hanging on some of the holds on the project, which are sort of maybe a little bit tweaky or uncomfortable, and just getting used to that position. Or maybe it's you need to like get your hamstrings really warmed up for a specific heel hook. And that can be iterative as well, and by the end of the process you've got a routine that you can kind of go through, and you sort of hitting checkpoints and you know that you're ready to try out your limit on the climb. So the end of the climb that I'm going to work on today is a 7A in its own right, which I've done before. So I'm just going to start by going through that and refreshing myself with it, and sort of serves as the end of my warm-up. Nice. So I'm going to break the projecting process down into 3 stages: an exploratory phase, a refinement phase, and an execution phase. These stages, they aren't the sort of like a set length. You might go through all 3 of them in a single session if it's a sort of session project level boulder, or if it's a really big limit project for you, you might spend several sessions or even like an entire season in one of the stages, sort of depending on what the climb demands of you. So stage 1, the exploratory stage. Now obviously this is the first stage, and I define it as being quite playful. You've not got any reference points yet, you don't know how any of the moves go, so it's those first steps where you're figuring out individual movements, trying out different options. So the climb that I'm trying starts on this sort of good spike here and follows the line of the lip over into what I just climbed. I don't really know what the sequence is yet, so I'm just going to sort of work along it and feel all the holds and just try and understand the little subtleties of how I'm going to grab them to try and get as much from them as possible. They're all so strange. There's like quite a lot that sort of could be a hold. It's not that obvious what the sort of order of operations is. So I've got a vague idea of what I'm going to try from feeling those from the ground, but I think the positions will feel really different when I'm actually on the wall and I'm getting weight into my feet. So basically I'm just going to start pulling on his positions and just starting to understand a little bit better how each position is going to link into the next, basically. Sort of a little bit disjointed, but it definitely works. I could have kept going, but I was trying to not get too far into a sequence and just start tiring myself out without actually really knowing what I'm doing. It's usually going to be better to drop off early, assess what was good and what wasn't, and then go again. And I think I've just found a different hold that I'm going to use. I think it's important to be open-minded in this stage and not sort of get yourself tunneled into a sequence too quickly. You can kind of go down a rabbit hole and you might have missed something that might be a better solution for you, and then several sessions down the line you realise that the direction you've gone isn't quite right. Then you need to come back a bunch of stages to go forwards again. So I think sort of being very thorough in the exploratory phase to find as many options as you possibly can and sort of rule out anything that doesn't work. Having the failures in this stage is as important as the successes, because it's something that you know then you can put to one side. I've got an idea of a sequence which I'm like not particularly confident in. I'm just going to pull on and rule it out, or maybe it is the way. The idea that I had in mind, as soon as I pulled on, it kind of felt quite obvious that it wasn't going to work. And then I just started basically just letting my body do its thing. Kind of a good example of you can't necessarily understand subtleties just from feeling the holes from the ground. So if I kind of follow that train of thought, I'm going to end up here and here with like a pretty extended heel toe that I think I'll be in too much tension to release. So before like spending energy doing a slightly bigger link, I'm just going to try and understand how this release might feel by jumping in off the ground. So it's not like the full movement, but it gives me an idea of how the end of the movement might go. And if that feels really hard, then it's probably not the way. But if it's okay, then it's worth exploring. So I'll be much more aggressive than that, but the end position at least I know feels okay. Definitely possible, but feels pretty hard. I probably need to explore that a little bit more, but I'm also sort of not certain that that's the best way. I'm not going to just narrow in on that immediately. I'd like a heel a bit further along the lip, but I haven't really figured out a way that would work yet. So sort of have a little look at both possibilities. So it's worth looking for rubber marks on the rock, especially on limestone that marks quite a lot. And there's like some dark marks here. This might be where people are seeing a heel. So I was just sort of playing with my shoe to see how it would fit and like where the toe might cam into the roof to create the tension. Before I was putting my heel on this and I'm feeling quite extended. So maybe if I can bring the heel, I'm holding here. If I can bring the heel into here, I'm gaining like 20 centimeters or something, which might just be enough to take the sting out of that big release move. I also think it's important to play with your percentage output in this stage. If you just try 100% in the first stages and you do a move, but you didn't necessarily learn very much about it, other than that if you try really hard, you can do it. Later down the line, that won't work. When you start to link an entire climb together, you need to sort of put as little into every move as possible. So when you add them together, it works. That might mean that you fall off a bunch of times, but then you sort of iterate that into just the right amount, and by giving less effort, you find the subtleties. And that's what the exploratory phase is about. It's about figuring everything out, not just trying to grip the holds off the wall. Oh, okay, better, but the release is really aggressive. Loads of little bits that I can improve there. I got the heel placed correctly eventually, but it didn't really feel seated until I'd done an extra move or so. So maybe that means that I need to like change my order of operations of when I'm placing each thing where, and it might mean that I can just speed things up a little bit. So that move's quite intense. So whilst I'm having a little bit of a rest from that, I'm gonna try and figure out the next little sequence across to the start position of the climb that I did at the beginning. Once I've placed the heel, that's quite locked in and I can like swim through the whole sequence, but placing it felt a bit inefficient. I'm not quite happy with that. I feel like I can do it better. I think that's fine. So just that like one crux move, which is like the main missing piece. I'm also not sure if my start sequence is particularly efficient yet. This is kind of the point where I probably need to sort of switch up a gear. At the minute, I've kind of been like 70, 80% or something whilst I'm figuring it out, whereas this move, I can feel that it just requires a bit more from me. So the next sort of bit to figure out is whether or not I just need to try really hard, or if there is anything else that can kind of bring the level down a little bit. By the way, if you're currently struggling on your project or just generally wanting to get stronger, it might be worth you trying a customized Lattice plan. What I think is really cool is they adapt in real time to the feedback that you give them. So if you're feeling tired in a week from a heavy week of work, it'll regulate the amount of sessions so that it's fitting the energy that you can give to it at a given time. So if you do want to give them a try, head to the link in the description below. Back to the video. So the second stage is the refinement stage. At this point, you should sort of have the broad strokes of your sequence figured out. You'll have done all of the individual moves, maybe linked a couple of moves together, but you haven't yet got a fully choreographed routine of the entire climb or sort of how you're conducting the entire session. So in refinement, you're going a level deeper. The first part of this, I suppose, is starting to link bigger sequences on the climb. And this isn't just about sort of doing a progressively bigger, sort of more difficult performance. It's more about understanding how, when you stack the moves together, they change and how each one interacts with one another. And you might find that suddenly when you climb into a position, it feels a little bit different and you need to make a small refinement. Or actually, if it's maybe a longer climb or a very intense sequence, that when you hit a certain move, having climbed into it, suddenly the way that you're doing it just is too intense, and you need to sort of go back a stage, back into exploration, and figure out the details a little bit further. I think that works. I also slightly changed the order of my heel sequence. So I reached out to the further pinch before placing this heel, which just meant that I was in the right position to oppose it. A big fart. Oh, a big fart. Oh God. A big fart. It just wants to come out. A big part of the refinement stage is also how you're conducting the session itself and bringing in some slightly higher level tactics. So that might be dialing a little bit more detail into what you're doing in your warm-up to be sort of optimally prepared for each sequence, or it might be understanding when in the day is better for conditions, or maybe that your skin needs to be at a given temperature and you need to put in place some tactics to cool the skin down. All these sort of non-climbing elements that all need to come together to make the entire routine work. You can also start building a tempo into your climbing session, so hitting a certain link coming out at the end of your warm-up that makes you feel ready to then stack onto another link, and that informs how each session will go. If you're feeling good, you might hit a bigger link more quickly, and then that will feed into maybe going for a full send go, or maybe if you feel like you're building a little bit more slowly, that might send you in a different direction where you're trying to do a smaller link or break something down a little bit further. It's a kind of transition phase where some of your efforts will be a bit more playful and exploratory, and other efforts will have a bit more intent and execution, and it kind of depends on exactly what you're needing to refine in a given moment during this stage of your projecting. Oh, no. I kind of skipped a stage there, to be honest. I was just going to figure out the starting sequence, but I then got set up into the same position and felt quite good. I was like, oh, I'm just going to switch it on and go straight to execution, which nearly worked. And then I was getting a little bit tired and I felt that I hadn't placed that heel as precisely as I needed to. I sort of thought it was good enough to get away with it and tried to ride it out, and then just at the last moment I lost tension. Oh, that was nearly it. I kind of feel like I need to go like one step back. At that point, I was kind of just freestyling it, which is what you're not supposed to do. I'm just going to do a kind of mental refinement, I guess, of like, this is what I need to think about here. This is how I need to be specifically placing this hand. This is where I need to move a bit quicker. This is where I need to slow down and try hard, and then go back into execution and try and make it happen. For sure, now I need to be like diligent with my rest, making sure that I'm optimizing factors. So I'm going to try and get my skin nice and cool. That was a pretty long effort and very much in the kind of anaerobic capacity range. Big rest is sensible. So I'll probably take 20, 30, could even take 40 minutes in this instance. So I'm trying to execute. I'm going to follow my own steps, have a big rest, and then try and make it happen. And finally, we have the execution phase. Now, at this point, you should pretty much have made the vast majority of the decisions and refined most of what you need to at this point. And that is going to allow you to have a really distinct shift in how you're approaching the climb. You don't want to be sort of having any uncertainty and playfulness. You're now sort of having this psychological shift to, I am trying to do the climb. It's 100% effort, and that means lower attempt frequency, bigger rests, and you should be focusing on trying hard and trusting your body's intuition. As soon as you start trying to think too consciously about what you're doing, at least for me, it's too much for my brain. If I focus on a single thing, suddenly something else in my body will go a little bit wrong. Full start. So it's better for me in the execution phase that I'm not really thinking about much of anything. You're kind of aiming for a flow state where you just try hard and you trust your body to do what you've been rehearsing for the previous two stages. So if you are trying to make any little tweaks at this point, I think you should only really try and do one thing at a time. So maybe you tweak one little thing and then you kind of get a data point from that. Was that good? Was that not? And then you go on to the next one. If you play with too many things at the same time, you don't necessarily learn because you changed a bunch of factors. You don't know which one was right, and you're trying not to change too many things. That's the entire point of the execution phase. So it's small little tweaks, sort of little iterations, whilst mostly just trying to try hard. Oh. I really didn't do a very good job of it. I was like sliding around right at the beginning and I was totally cooked by the time I got to the 7A at the end. But just had like just barely enough to make it happen. I think it's important to note that any projecting process that's close to your limit won't be a linear progress through everything. So that can be a bit of a sticking point for people. They feel like they're at the point of, I'm trying to do the boulder now, whereas maybe it would be faster for them to go back a stage, play with something, and then come back to executing again, rather than just like banging their head against it and it not learning so much. So goal setting is really important when it comes to projecting, especially if it's a bigger project that's going to take you multiple sessions or even multiple seasons. The end goal of completing the boulder is going to feel pretty overwhelming and far away. So we kind of need to put that to one side to start with and set yourself small little incremental achievable goals, making the process feel more manageable. And that will kind of go somewhat in line with the stages that we've outlined. So the main goal of the exploration phase is to do each of the individual moves. The main goal of the refinement phase is doing some bigger links and digging into those details. And then the goal of the execution phase is obviously to do it. But I think you can go a level deeper than that as well. Like if it's a big project, just doing a new high point might not necessarily be a reliable objective for every session. You're probably going to have some regression sessions in there. It won't be a linear process. So mix it up a little bit with what those goals are going to be. It might be doing a low point, so sort of how far into the boulder you can start and get to the end, or on a move that you find really hard, it might be trying to do that move a few times in a row in the session, or doing a link that you've done before more times in a session. So it's demonstrating these small little incremental improvements when the obvious metrics of success of like doing a new high point aren't necessarily there. I also think having some like process focused goals is valuable as well. So at the point where you're really struggling to get like a tangible bit of progress in the session, you could still be like, well, I added this little bit of detail to my warm-up, or I figured out a new way to manage my skin that it feels a little bit better on this certain hold, or I'm hitting sort of certain links in my session in the right order. Any sort of thing like this which isn't performance oriented, that can still be kind of mean that you have something to show for the session. Another thing you can do is having like tiered objectives for a session. So you can have like a bronze goal of doing a given link that feels very achievable, and like a silver objective and a gold objective. And even if you don't reach silver or gold, you still have met one of the metrics that you set for yourself. It can be very easy to get demotivated or just feel like it's not going to happen if you're not finding ways to keep giving yourself carrots to keep the process enjoyable, basically. So there are some common things that people tend to get wrong with projecting. And the first and probably the main one is just not being patient enough. I think especially if you're coming from like an indoor background where like the turnover of boulders is quite high and you're used to trying to sort of do boulders quite quickly, it's difficult to extrapolate that out to an outdoor project that might be taking you several sessions. And I think it can often manifest itself in people trying to sort of rush through the stages and missing all of these little details that make it then feel impossible, when they just haven't given themselves the time to just really dig into the boulder, sort of gain that muscle memory and see how much progress can be made when an appropriate amount of time is given to it. You can also have the reverse of this, where people are very zen and like really enjoy the exploratory aspect of trying moves, and they never quite get to that last stage of executing, and they actually just need to sort of force it a little bit and learn how to flick gears and switch it on and just sort of make it happen, rather than just sort of getting bogged down a little bit. The next one is sort of under-analyzing your movement and sort of climbing very intuitively which works really well to a point until you can't figure a move out. And then you kind of need to break it down a little bit further, almost make yourself climb a little bit worse to really focus on a certain little aspect and drill it in, and then build the layers back on top of one another to then climb intuitively at the end point, having broken the movement down and really, really understanding it. Otherwise, it can feel a bit like you're just shooting in the dark, trying different things, and you don't really know what you did differently because you haven't really broken it down. You can also have the opposite of that, where you analyze everything to the nth degree and you stop your body from climbing intuitively at all, and you get bogged down in all these different little things that you're trying to do perfectly, and your body just can't process it. And really you need to take that step back and just trust that your body has learnt those things that you've been thinking about and just sort of let it do its thing. The next is over-managing. There's all sorts of factors that you do need to do your best to control in a projecting process, like your skin, like the rest days that you had before the session, how you conduct yourself within the session. All these things you do need to break down and have a strategy for, but there is a certain degree of inexplicable variance. And you just will have some sessions that feel worse. And if you're trying to kind of rationalize every single little thing that happens, you can just find yourself frustrated and not enjoying it. So I think it's valuable just to have like a degree of acceptance that it won't necessarily always go your way, and that's okay. Just sort of learn the lessons that you can learn, and if you can't find something to learn, just move on from it. Obviously, you can do the reverse of this as well and not manage everything properly and be turning up with bad skin and not properly rested, and that's obviously also unproductive. One that sometimes comes up is getting in too deep with a project, sinking a lot of time and effort into it and feeling because of the commitment that you've had to it that you need to sort of keep banging your head against a project. And there will be a point where that stops being productive, and actually the best thing for you to do to succeed long term is to take a little bit of a step back from it, probably go and do a training cycle and come back refreshed, probably in better shape, being okay with not giving up, but just sort of putting a project on pause. There's also a reverse of that as well, where people kind of have a fear of failure and they stop as soon as it starts to be a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, so that turned out to be quite a condensed version of a projecting session. The boulder turned out to be sort of doable for me in a single session, which means I could rocket through each of the stages relatively quickly. In reality, if I was at something that was properly at my limit, I would have needed to take a bunch more time, especially in the refinement stage, which is actually where you're going to spend the biggest chunk of your time. In this circumstance, I didn't need to go to quite that level of detail. But I still think you still go through those stages, and you still have to have that very distinct point in the session where you change that psychological mode from I'm figuring things out to I'm resting and I'm executing, and I'm going to try 100%, I'm going to make this happen. That is very much a skill that you learn from going through this process again and again and again, like cueing your body in to flick into that mode and make things happen.